Hello, everybody. I'm Charles Gies, and here to talk about my journey with autism. I'm 76 years old. I'm originally from New York City, oldest of three kids in my family. My parents, my mom and dad were both writers. My mom was an English teacher, high school English teacher, and my dad was an editor. And then later years, they wrote a number of books on medieval history. Hi, Heidi. How are you doing? Anyway, what were the early signs that I showed? I'm not sure what the earliest things that my parents saw. I know one thing was that when I was 4 years old, I discovered how to add. And my parents worked with me on arithmetic. And by the time I entered first grade, I was able to do multiple digit multiplication and long division. I was way ahead of everybody in math. Hi, Dinah. But I didn't have any friends. Couldn't figure out how to fit in with the other kids socially. And for kindergarten, I remember they would sing songs. I'd never heard of these songs. And I guess I probably wasn't paying attention when the teacher first taught them to the kids. And the other kids seemed to pick them up right away, and I didn't. Then came an incident on the bus. One day, the bus was in a fender bender accident on the way to school. And the accident itself wasn't a big deal, but the bus driver shut us kids up on the bus while he talked at length. Hi, Heidi. Yeah, I'm doing fine. Anyway, he shut us up in the bus while he talked with the other driver and the police officer, and I was crying nonstop. And after that, it was months before I could be persuaded to get on a school bus again. So as a result, I missed most of kindergarten. Back then, kids didn't do anything academic in kindergarten. Kindergarten was just playtime, basically. It was about socialization. Then first grade, and the first few days of first grade, I wasn't paying any attention to what the teacher was doing. She passed out a big sheet of paper, and what we were supposed to do with it, I don't know. Maybe write our names, but I'm kind of dubious about that because a lot of kids entered first grade not knowing how to read or write. But anyway, I filled up that page that she gave me with counting by 76s up to 7,600. Teacher looked at it and he goes, well, I never. First few days of school, I wasn't paying any attention to what the teacher was doing. I was just counting by 76s on whatever paper I had in front of me. And the teacher was sending notes home with me to my mom. And finally, they got me paying attention, at least to some degree, in class. But there were other things, like, a teacher wrote a number of sentences on the board for us to read, and I wouldn't read them because they all started with the word hello, and hello had a profanity embedded in it. I wouldn't read the word hello because it had an embedded profanity. The teacher couldn't understand why I wouldn't read those sentences. He knew I could read them. Well, then, at one point, I got sick. I was running a low-grade fever, had a sore throat. And anyway, we had hi, Elizabeth. Oh, hi, Kate. That's Kate. That's right. Hi, Kate. How are you doing? Yeah, I was running a low-grade fever and a sore throat. And so we had a doctor that came to the house that time, pediatrician that my uncle John had helped through medical school, and so he was very nice to us. Anyway, he examined me, and he placed a glass of water on the floor next to my couch, and so the couch where I was laying, and asked me to bend down and pick up the glass of water. Well, at that time, I wouldn't drink from any glasses that didn't have designs on them. And that glass was a plain glass. And so I wouldn't bend down and pick it up. So he thought I couldn't bend down and pick it up. And as he was leaving, I heard my mom say to him, well, then I guess he must have polio. I didn't know what polio was, but okay, it sounded cool. That's polio. Well, later on that day, I had the most painful medical experience of my life. And doctor came back, brought with him a nurse and some other people, and they laid me face down on the dining room table, and they started sticking my spine with needles, expecting fluid to gush out. And I was screaming. Finally, they figured out that all I had was tonsillitis. They gave me a penicillin shot for that, which was a lot less painful than what I had just gone through. And there were other things in school that my mom and dad had a hard time understanding. The teacher had a hard time understanding. But then another thing came up, was I had this idea that you could only use the school restrooms when the class had a bathroom break. And so if I had to go and there was no class bathroom break at the time, I couldn't wait. I just wet or dirtied my pants in class. And so that caused the school to demand that my parents take me to a child psychiatrist, which mom did. And she wrote a long letter to him, and she detailed all the oddities she'd observed about me. But she started out with the issue that immediately drove her to take me to him. That shrink read just the first paragraph of that letter, and on the basis of that first paragraph, he issued a dismissive diagnosis. He said the problem was all mom's fault. She was obsessed with toilet training, and that was the problem. Well, in fact, I was toilet trained already, had been for years. It just, I had this idea that you couldn't use the school bathroom except when there was a class bathroom break. And it occurs to me, this is something that distinguishes the run-of-the-mill scientists from the Isaac Newtons and the Albert Einsteins. In the centuries between Aristotle and Isaac Newton, there were many physicists, and all of them signed on to Aristotle's theory that the universe was consisted of a series of concentric spheres with the Earth in the middle, was held together by a series of invisible rods. And finally, Isaac Newton actually, investigated instead of just accepting what was the commonly held belief, and he figured out that the Earth was held in this place by gravity, and gravity is what holds the universe together, and not the invisible rods, as Aristotle had proclaimed. And in the years that followed, two other mental health professionals found other ways to blame my mom for my problems. And it was Sigmund Freud's sexist philosophy: when in doubt, blame the mother. And continuing, although that summer after first grade, with some convincing by my parents, I decided that when I needed to use the school bathroom, I would ask permission, and I had no more accidents in school after that. But I still couldn't fit in with other kids. There were other issues. One of them was that at some point, I think when I was about 6 years old, I decided I didn't like the holes that a fork made in food, and so I refused to eat with a fork. Well, that caused problems for me when I got to third grade, because now we had a longer school day and included a hot lunch, and with the lunch they gave you the utensils that were appropriate for whatever food they were serving. So it didn't include a spoon, We didn't get a spoon. And so I would eat with my hands. Other kids would be saying, eat with a fork, not with your hands. Hi, Kelly. She doesn't want people showing her graduation ceremony because she doesn't want people looking at her. I guess one thing, try to find out why she doesn't like people looking at her. That's the first thing I would say. Find out why she doesn't like it, and because only once you understand that can you go from there. Because that's the problem I haven't had. I've had other problems making eye contact with people. I had to learn to do that. I had to be told that I should do that, and I had to practice doing that. It came naturally to other kids. I had to learn to do. But as far as not liking other people looking at her, first of all, find out why, and then you can go from there. One day when I was in the fourth grade, I snapped out of it with that fork issue. And then I decided that spoons were for babies, and I insisted on eating everything with a fork, even ice cream. I must have made an exception for some things like soup, because you can't very well eat soup with a fork. But I ate a lot of things with a fork that people normally eat with spoons, including, I think, if you have a melon with breakfast, most people eat that with a spoon. I would insist on eating that with a fork. I think I finally got over that when I got somewhere in high school. I think when I got to the age where I started drinking coffee, that's when I got over that. They made accommodations for me with math, endeavored to give me an opportunity I could study more advanced math than the other kids, because math the other kids were studying wasn't challenging me. In fifth grade, when I was in fifth grade, the school principal approached me one day in the cafeteria and showed me a diagram of a geometric thing, and asked me if, given the lengths of certain lines in there, could I figure out the length of this dotted line? And I couldn't. And so then he said, when you come to my office a half hour before school ends each day, I'll teach you geometry. And he did. When the school year ended, we hadn't finished the book, so he gave me the book to take home, and I studied it over summer vacation. And from that point on, they were able to make arrangements to teach me more advanced math until I finished Math 12 in 8th grade. And then I had to take correspondence courses from the university. I was able eventually make friends with a couple of younger boys, and so I was able to have some socialization. An issue illustrating the problems I had, even sometimes understanding rules. I remember in a movie theater once, I must have been about 13 or 14 back then. They had pop vending machines in the movie theaters, and there was one movie theater, they had a sign on that said, "Please don't take drinks to the seats." So I got my drink, and I thought it was okay to take it back in the auditorium and stand in the aisle and drink it, because I wasn't taking it to my seat. And this usher came up to me and she asked, "What's the matter with you? Can't you read?" And she must have thought I was being smart alecky when I said, "But the sign said to the seats." But again, I took that sign literally, the way it was worded. Well, I was able to make friends with a couple of younger guys. I was not able to navigate the dating scene in high school. Other boys were telling me about the good times they were having on dates, and I was missing out on that. One thing too I started doing is every week I would track the top 40 hits. I would listen to the top 40 hits on the radio, and I would track how the songs moved from week to week. But again, that was my thing. My mom especially bore a lot of the brunt of my aggression at home. A lot of it driven by frustration over my inability to fit in with other kids my age, and also jealousy of my sister who made friends so easily. When I was in my senior year of high school, I placed first in the state of Connecticut in a national math contest. And I got a whole bunch of awards there at the end of the year. And that was a good thing, but again, I think I would have traded all of that for the ability to fit in with the other kids. Started reading Playboy magazine. I thought Playboy philosophy was the best thing since Swiss cheese. But of course, I couldn't make it work for me. When I got to college, I played some card games already, and I also played chess. And that offered me some opportunities for socialization. I saw guys playing bid whist, and just from watching them, I learned how to play, and soon I was playing with them, and so that gave me some opportunity to socialize with them, and one guy in my dorm sat me down and gave me some advice which helped me, among other things, look at people and talking to them. And so that taught me that. Later on, I learned do better than that, make eye contact, do that. There's one girl I dated briefly there in college, and so I had more social opportunities than I had before. Meanwhile, my family moved from Connecticut, where we had lived, to Illinois. Now, one thing too that's made a big difference in my life is my beliefs. I grew up. My parents were basically free thinkers. My dad was an atheist. My mom attended an Episcopal church. She was very modernistic in her thinking. And so that's kind of what I was raised on and what I embraced. But then in the summer between my sophomore and junior years of college, a young lady called at our house, and she was one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and she started a discussion with my mom, and I sat in and I started asking questions, and I started going to the meetings at the Kingdom Hall, and I ended up continuing my discussions in college, and I ended up becoming one of the Jehovah's Witnesses. This introduced me to a global brotherhood, and I mean a lot more people with whom I now could find things in common, and also gave me principles in life to follow that helped me get along better with people in general. Just being nice to people without necessarily expecting anything in return. Positive outlook on life, all that helped. And also eased my anxiety about dating. Dating now something that was with marriage in view, and at that time I wasn't yet ready to look for a marriage mate. Now then, when I landed my first job and I got my apartment, that changed that. And from this point, in fact, I'm going to talk the rest of this in a topical manner rather than a chronological manner. First, about my history with employment and how I came to my autism diagnosis, and then my experience with romance. Now, finding my first job, it took several months of job hunting. Finally, a man in one of the employment agencies I went to told me, all the things I was doing wrong in the interview and what I needed to do. There were other lessons I learned too in the process, like filling out the job application. And they asked about college organizations I belong to. Some things are better off to leave out. Like when I was at Michigan State, I joined the campus NAACP. Best not to mention that, because even though I didn't have long hair, didn't look like a hippie, still white guy in a civil rights organization, they're going to read hippie into that. And so best to leave that off. Another thing, some trick questions. One is they ask you in connection, when they ask you about your college education, they ask you what the 3 most valuable courses were that you took in college and 3 least valuable. 3 most valuable, they want you to name courses related to the job you're applying for. Even if you thought some other courses were valuable to you, they want 3 related to the job you're applying to. 3 least valuable, best to leave that blank. It's going to raise too many questions, anything you put in there. So best to say, that everything you took in college was of value. Best to say, I can't really answer that question. What finally helped me land my first job is a number of places gave me this programming aptitude test. And I took it so many times that finally I scored a perfect score on it. And that helped me get my first job at an insurance company in Chicago. I worked there for 6 years. After that, I moved with my family to Virginia and found a job there quickly based on my job history. I moved around a couple of jobs, ended up with First American Bank, later became First American Data Services, worked there 12 years. And from there, I was hired by a company called Computer Associates at the time, later changed its name to CA Technologies. And I worked there just shy of 24 years before I finally retired in 2015. So I worked as a mainframe computer software engineer for about 45 years altogether. And something I found too, and Temple Grandin mentions that in this book, is that people he worked with before who've seen what you could do can make your best references. And especially when you have someone you worked with before who's working for the company where you're applying, that can really help in landing that job. Well, now, how did I come to my diagnosis? When I was growing up, and a lot of people had never heard about autism. I certainly had never heard about it. When I was in college, I heard there was such a thing as what they called an idiot savant. That's a term that's no longer in use now, but that was a term in vogue then. But that really described someone like Rain Man, who was very good in one subject, but so handicapped in everything else that his ability in that one subject didn't really do him any good. It didn't really serve him in any practical way. Well, now, when I was in my 30s, my first wife, Judy, she told me that there was a TV movie coming on about an educational program for autistic children. I asked her, what's that? And she said, well, their kids are kind of off in their own world, and how they manage to reach these kids, how they help the parents in reaching these kids. And so I thought, well, I was kind of off in my own world, and when I was in the starting first grade, I was counting my 76s, not paying attention to the teacher. But when I saw these kids spinning the wheels endlessly on their toys, I said, no, I didn't do that. That's not me. Well, then we met a young man who was autistic, and he actually had benefited from that educational program, what's more. And I could see some things in him that I could relate to, but still kind of dismissed. I saw, I was functioning in life much better than he was, and so I kind of dismissed there being any connection. But still, I was aware that my thinking process is a lot different from the thinking process of most people. Well, then, in February 1995, an issue of Awake magazine had an article about autism. And that article had a box in there about special abilities. And it mentioned that some autistic people have special abilities in subjects like math. Well, after I read that article and there that box, I wondered, is there a milder version of what I've just read in this article? I read about in this article. But then I kind of forgot about it. Well, in the meantime, my daughter went to see the movie Rain Man, and she started urging me to see the movie. One day in December of that year, 1995, I turned on the TV, and the movie Rain Man happened to be coming on, happened to be starting. So I knew Dorothy had been urging me to see this movie. Let me watch it. And I quickly realized why. I could see that I was a milder version of Raymond. Even things like his being able to do the multiplications in his head. I couldn't multiply numbers that big in my head, but I could multiply 3-digit numbers in my head. So I could see that, and his reaction to, he heard a catchy commercial jingle and he started repeating it over and over again. I could relate to my reaction to hearing some catchy jingle. And some of the other things I could see, like I would have understood that if I'm halfway across the street and the sign changes from walk to don't walk, I had enough common sense to tell me that I should keep on crossing the street. But I could understand his stopping when the sign changed from walk to don't walk, stopping in his tracks as he did in that one scene in the movie. Now, after watching the movie, I went and looked up autism in the Mayo Clinic Family Medical Guide. And at the end of the discussion of autism, it said there is also a milder form of autism whose main symptom is social awkwardness. Bingo. Well, subsequently, I called my mom a few days later, maybe a couple of weeks later. I started out by saying, this may sound crazy, but, and I told her what I suspected, and she said it didn't sound crazy to her at all. She thought I was onto something. And I told my sister, who was 3 years younger than I was, and told her the same thing. And she said, yeah, she thought I was probably right. Sometime later, I was listening to a program on NPR, and an interview with Temple Grandin came on when she was talking about her book, Thinking in Pictures, which was either had just been released or was just about to be released. And I said I need to get a copy of that book, so I bought a copy of it, read it through, so now I understood the terminology. The terminology has changed since then, but At the time, Asperger's syndrome was the terminology for what I had, and I called the local chapter of the Autism Society of America, and they referred me to a neurologist who specialized in autism. So I went to him, and he said he didn't even have to give me a lot of tests. I just described my childhood to him, and he said, "Yeah, that's autism." He said, "You have Asperger's syndrome," and so that's how I was diagnosed. And since then, I've let other people know about it, and now I'm glad to find this group where I can share my experiences. Well, let's go back to my experiences with romance. I was introduced to Judy at a 3-day assembly of Jehovah's Witnesses in Chicago. And we were introduced on Friday, and Saturday she wasn't there, but then Sunday she was there. Meantime, some others coached me about, ask her if you can sit with her on Sunday. And so I did, and she said, okay. And, in between the sessions we talked, and at the end of the afternoon session, I asked her out on a date for the following week, and she said yes. I took her out to dinner the following Sunday, and we started dating from there. And eventually, I decided, it's time to propose, but it was awkward. She had to ask me, is this a proposal? Well, I brought it up, but anyway, I said yes, and she said yes, and so, and went and bought her the ring. We picked out the rings, and then, then we, started planning the wedding, and we got married in August of 1971. And, we went to California for our honeymoon, stayed at Disneyland Hotel, a nice time. And it was 3 months later that Judy got pregnant, and our daughter was born the day after our first anniversary. And that was our only child that we had. Judy had an eating problem. She put on a lot of weight during the first year of marriage, and she continued gaining weight. And, we realized that another pregnancy would probably be dangerous for her health, so we took precautions to avoid it. Now, when Dorothy was 3 years old, we moved to Virginia. I met a whole bunch of new friends there, new environment, but we liked it there. One lady we met there, and Judy became friends with, was a lady by the name of Heloise Lewis. She and her husband had recently separated. Her husband was an advisor to Senator Henry Jackson from the state of Washington. They had just separated recently, and a few years later they divorced, and then a few years after that, Heloise moved to New Haven, Connecticut, where she had lived before. And Judy and I stayed in touch with her over the years. Eventually, Judy's health declined to the point where, she needed constant nursing care. Finally, in August 1996 is when she died. I remember when she was on her deathbed, I spent then Sunday morning at her bedside in the hospital. Then I went to the Kingdom Hall because we had our meetings in the afternoon at that time. And a young Helois's daughter, Kim, who had moved to Virginia and gotten married there, was, well, I walked my car to the Kingdom Hall. Actually, a number of friends who were in the congregation that met in the morning were greeting me and giving me their condolences. So they'd heard about Judy, that she was not expected to live. And then Kim, Helois's daughter, intercepted me as I entered the hall, and she said there was somebody outside waiting to see me. And I knew right away that had to be her mother. It had to be Helois. And Kim later told us that on that occasion she sensed the electricity between her mother and me as we spoke briefly, and as her mother gave me some words of comfort. And Kim realized where things might be going. And the next week after Judy's death, we had her memorial service, and then a friend of Judy's had a repast for her at her house. I saw Helois there, and I said, I'm not going to have a bite of food till I talk with her. And we sat outside in this, like a swing love seat that's on the porch of Maureen's house, and talked at length. And that was the start of things. Then we started talking on the phone from time to time. I would call her. She called her long distance. She called me sometimes. And then she began to get uncomfortable with our phone calls. So she told a lady by the name of Jerry, was a mutual friend of ours who we both known for many years. She told Jerry she was getting uncomfortable. He asked, how can I get him to stop calling me? And Jerry said, I think that brother's interested in you. And Jerry said, can't be. And Helois said, can't be. And Jerry said, I think he's interested in you. It can't be. And then Jerry asked her, why can't it be? And Helois told her, it can't be. And Jerry asked her, why can't it be? And Helois said, trust me, it just can't be. And the next time I called Helois, she was ready for me. After we'd exchanged initial pleasantries, she told me, nothing personal. I don't want you to take this personally or anything, but I am sick to death of white folks. She thought that would scare me off, and it didn't. And so then she asked, do your parents know you've been talking with a black woman? How do your parents feel about race? And I told her they just wanted me to be happy. And she didn't really believe that, but she couldn't get any farther with that. Well, then at that point, I wasn't quite sure how to proceed. But a few days later, I called Jerry because I knew that she and Helois talked regularly, and I told her I'm talking with Helois, and I was trying to find out if Jerry knew anything about where I stood there. And Jerry first pretended not to know anything, and she started laughing, and then she gave me as positive a spin on her conversation with Helois as she could. Helois said that told her I'll hear him out, but I don't think so. And so the next time I called Helois the following night, and we talked, and I told her I would like to come up to visit. And I was scheduled for a class in Long Island at my company's headquarters, and the week of October 21st, and so I'd like to come up the weekend before that. Well, at that point, that was right at the end of September, Helois gave me her mom's phone number and her work phone number so I could reach her at any time. And we started talking every day, but she was determined to talk me out of coming. But the funny thing happened. As the second weekend in October approached, people who knew Helois began to notice a glow about her. People who knew me began to notice a glow about me. And that Sunday when we talked, it was the weekend before I was due to come up there. I broke the ice and told Eloise I loved her. Next day I got home from work and found she had left a love song in my answering machine. And things proceeded from there. Next week we had our first date in person. I went up to New Haven prior to my class. This time I proposed to her over the phone while I was on Long Island. And she immediately accepted. And after I got out of my class on that Saturday, I met her at a friend's apartment in New York City, and we went out to dinner and a Broadway show to celebrate our engagement. So during those months that followed, we planned our wedding. She would meet me at the train station in New Haven or at Tweed Airport. We would go somewhere and we would sit in the car and smooch for a few minutes, and we would go in and eat breakfast, and it was really nice. And we were married in April. And we went to Hawaii for a honeymoon. Really beautiful honeymoon. Eloise decided that during our second year of marriage, Eloise decided that for all our efforts, we ought to have some children to show for our efforts. Eloise was in her 50s. She was past menopause. But she was like, we ought to have some children to show for our efforts. So she went out and bought 3 lifelike dolls that we called our children. We named them Quanisha, Xerxes, and Tashima. So they were our children. And we kept them in the house all along through the years. We enjoyed a lot of travels together. Went to International Religious Convention in London. We went to Las Vegas twice. We don't gamble, but we went there and enjoyed the shows and enjoyed the accommodations. We even had a really nice hotel room for relatively cheap compared to what you pay for the room elsewhere, because they expect you're going to be gambling. However, the food, the dinners, they cost money, but the hotel room accommodations are nice anyway. So we did that. Enjoyed a lot of travels together, but Eloise's health declined as time went on, and her mobility issues became more severe. In the end, she was walking around in 2 canes, and finally all the doctors told her they couldn't do anything for her pain unless she had hip surgery. So she went in for hip surgery and contracted an infection, and that led to generalized sepsis, and she died without leaving the hospital. That was in December of 2010. At that time, I didn't think I could remarry anytime soon, but after a few months, after even a couple of months already, coming home to an empty apartment night after night was getting old. So there are a number of good women, my spiritual sisters in the congregation that I knew, that were available. But there was one friend of Eloise's in particular that drew my attention. She lived in New Haven. I'd met her when I was dating Eloise. As Eloise had told all her friends that she wouldn't consider dating, much less marrying interracially. And Cindy is one of the people that told her never say never. And still, Cindy was surprised when she saw me with her, and she asked her what's up with that, and I always told her. Anyway, they were good friends, and we stayed in touch with them over the years. A couple times Cindy came down to visit us. And anyway, she had attracted my attention. And so finally in May of 2011, I called up Cindy and said I would like to get better acquainted. And we talked for a while, and she said she'd think it over. And the next day she texted me and said, okay. And so we started talking every day, and she came down to visit in June. That's when we had our first date in person. And I went up to visit her at the end of June. And we had a couple that were with us that morning as their chaperones, and I asked them if they'd like to accompany us. They had a place to go, so they said sure. So I drove to New Haven Green, parked the car, and they all got out. The other couple walked in different directions. They walked in one direction. Cindy and I walked in the other direction. I proposed to Cindy on the green there, and she said yes. We went to a jeweler there, picked out the rings, and from there, I figured, okay, when are we going to get married? Well, my lease, my apartment expired in the beginning of January, and Cindy's lease expired in March, and so we decided March would be the time that we would get married. And so that's what we did. We planned our wedding. We would see each other in person at least once each month. And other than that, we would talk on the phone, and so that's how it was. And we got married on Friday, March 16th, 2012. We honeymooned in Jamaica, and that was really nice. We still have pictures from that, along with our wedding pictures. In 2014, we had put in our application, and we were approved to attend an international convention of Jehovah's Witnesses in Germany in the summer of 2014. And another bit of excitement, about a month before we left for that convention, and I was appointed an elder in the congregation. That's the goal I've been working toward for years and finally reached. And so, anyway, we had that under my belt. We went to the convention and enjoyed that. We've enjoyed other travels, going to Atlanta to visit with relatives of hers, including a singer by the name of David Collins, who lives in the suburbs of Atlanta. In January 2015, I got the news I knew was coming sooner or later that my company was eliminating my job. And that came with a big severance package, because I'd worked for the company for 23 full years. The 24th year wasn't complete, so that didn't count. 23 times 2, it's 46 weeks severance pay. I called Cindy with the news. She said, it's time for you to retire. I was 68 years old by then. And so, we right away realized we couldn't stay in Virginia because the cost of living there is too high. So we moved to Connecticut, moved to North Carolina, excuse me. Moved there for a couple of years, enjoyed it there. But then Cindy realized she wanted really to be closer to her old friends and her family in Connecticut. And I didn't mind moving to Connecticut either, because my daughter's in Maine, and my my daughter and my grandchildren in Maine. So they decided, okay, let's do a house hunting trip. We did, found a house we liked, so that's where we are now. We're in Connecticut. I enjoy cooking. I do cook most of the meals for Cindy and me. She does some of it too. And that's a shared responsibility. We've hosted card parties. We both play bid whist and enjoy playing that with people. But that's one thing we missed during the pandemic. When we were in lockdown, we couldn't really get together with other people, but we enjoyed each other's company, and we really enjoyed, living through the pandemic together, and the shared experience. I found myself be a rule enforcer in some ways. Well, cheating, no, but grammar was one area where I would be a rule enforcer. Now I tell people grammar ain't no big deal, and besides, mine has been dead for half a century. But when people, kids said something ungrammatical, I felt a need to correct them, and it especially got me when a teacher said something that was ungrammatical. Hi, Linda. How are you doing, Linda? So to keep a job because of autism. I mean, I think the biggest thing is being nice to other people, even when they don't seem to be being nice to you. Ask questions when, and even when you think you understand something, ask questions, particularly of your boss. Get a clear picture. If you have, particularly look at things that you're having problems with, specific problems. You're having problems understanding directions, and ask more questions the next time you get directions to do something. Make sure you understand what you're being asked to do. One of the tough things is if you're dealing with an office bully who's spreading stories about you because you don't know what's being said about you behind your back. We have a tendency to have a problem with perspective. The fact that not everybody's dealing with the same set of facts, and especially when somebody's dealing with a set of facts that are not really facts, that includes some falsehoods. That can be difficult for us to figure out. Some of what this person thinks he or she knows is wrong. Well, the Americans with Disabilities Act should help with that. Now, struggling to get a job is one thing, but Americans with Disabilities Act should prevent somebody from firing you simply because they go back and look at your application, a job you're currently working at, and say, hey, she has autism. We need to can her. ADA should protect you from that nonsense. The problem comes when there's, some autism-related issue that makes it difficult to get along on the job, something like that. Then you get in a more nebulous area, but the ADA, they're not supposed to be able to look back at your application and say, hey, this person has such and such disability. We need to get rid of her. Thank you, Foxy. Enjoy having you in the group. Well, you see me with my head movements, and that's something that in recent days I've noticed, Cindy's noticed, and my daughter's noticed too. Dorothy's noticed that seems to be increasing. I don't know, maybe I'm not getting enough sleep. That's what I'm thinking. Maybe I need to get more sleep. But hey, Amber, good to see you here. Does he know he has autism? Does he know he is on the autism spectrum? I understand that there are some children's books that deal with autism. I don't know what they are because, say, I got my diagnosis as an adult, so the books about autism I'm familiar are books written for adults, but I understand there are books written for children that deal with autism, and so you might look for some of those books. Google the subject on the internet, even Google children's books about autism, and you should get some ideas from that. Yeah, thank you, Pam. And Emily's cold now. Yeah, I know. That's one thing about having a child who's school age is that whatever's going on in the school, you end up getting. That's one thing that changed after Dorothy graduated high school. No longer had to deal with that, with things that went wrong in the school and came back to the home. Yeah, thank you, Kate. Yeah, because ADA should prevent them from doing that. If that's the reason. That's a good question because, that's a very good question, but it might be, maybe he should say it because, like I say, that does or should give him the protection of the ADA, and also might explain, the interviewer sees some mannerisms that he wonders what's up with this, and he sees autism. Okay, now that helps me to understand it. And some companies even have a commitment to employ people with various disabilities, and so that may even help in some places. Now, what's interesting about staying up front with autism, back when Heloise and I sat outside in Maureen's house on the swing, I had just recently been diagnosed with autism. And I told her about my diagnosis, and that helped her understand me better from that point on, because she always told me she always knew there was something different about me, but she didn't know what it was. But she had long admired me, and I had long admired her. Things about her that I admired, and things about me that she admired. It was the same way with Cindy. She had long admired things about me. She knew about my autism from the get-go because, of course, she had known me from after I started dating Cindy, after I started dating Heloise. So, it was no secret to her. But, again, it was mutual admiration there from the start, and that blossomed into love. And that's why I would recommend, look for children's books about autism as they do exist. I just haven't read any of them because, like I say, when I got diagnosed, I was almost 50 years old. my grown daughter was the one who, started me heading for a diagnosis. Well, I guess my hour is up, but hope my experiences have been helpful to the parents here. Hope they've been some encouragement. And it's my pleasure. Glad we do this again. Okay, you're welcome. Like I said, I like to be of help to somebody, be of some encouragement. Love you too. I'm glad to do this, Diana. Good night, Amber. All right. Good night, Kelly. Okay, well, end the session then. Good night, everyone who's left.